This week, we are going to go through the differences between Prosecco and Champagne. And in the tip of the week, we'll talk about why is it Prosecco makes for such a great gift. All of that coming up next. Hello and welcome to Wine This Week with Scott Leek. We're talking about Prosecco, and Prosecco has a lot of unique qualities that separate it from other sparkling wines like Champagne, Cava, or the sparkling wines you find in the United States. There's four main things I'll go into. Number one, the grapes are different. Number two, the way it's made is very different. Three, the way it's made thus influences the cost. Prosecco is usually among the cheapest. And lastly, they taste different. So let's start with the grapes. Prosecco was originally called Prosecco, but it was also a region. So it was a little confusing on the history of this. It is now known as Glera. That is the primary grape. There's a couple other indigenous Italian varietals that go into it, but about 85% or more of it is the grape now known as Glera. And it is usually made in the Vento, sometimes in the Friuli region in northeastern Italy. It came about probably around 1860, I want to say, and that's about 150 years after Champagne came into existence. So it's relatively newer, but still it's been around for quite a long time. But the more modern way in which it's made is known as the Charmat method, and also known as the tank method. And that's only been around for a little bit over 100 years. So basically, someone's trying to figure out, how do I make something that's a lot like Champagne, but do so in a much more cost-effective manner? Because the way they make Champagne is very labor-intensive, and thus it makes it more expensive. So in Prosecco, they use this method known as the Charmat method, named after the guy who invented it. And what they do is they make still wine out of Glera the way that you make any other white wine. But instead of doing a second fermentation directly in the bottle, they do it in a giant pressurized tank. They add sugar, they add yeast, and at that time, the sugar gets eaten by the yeast. It produces carbon dioxide. It's pressurized inside that tank, so it has nowhere to go. So it starts to form the bubbles. What then they do is they take all that leftover dead yeast, or the lees that's normally disgorged out of a bottle, and they just filter it out of the tank, and they put them each into pressurized bottles. At the end of the day, this is a lot easier, a lot cheaper to do. You can do it in mass quantities, so it's significantly different than how it's done in Champagne. And as a result of the way they do it, there's not as much pressure in each bottle. So there's only about 3 to 4 atmospheres of pressure in this compared to 6 in Champagne. So your bubbles are going to dissipate more quickly in Prosecco. Don't think that that means you have a bad Prosecco or that there's something wrong with it. It's going to last a little bit longer than the fizz in a beer, but not as long as the fizz in a Champagne. Now, when it comes to the flavors of Prosecco, they're going to be a little different from Champagne there as well. They're only aged in that tank before bottled for about 3 months. Compared to Champagne, it's a minimum of a year, sometimes 18 months, 36 months, depending on the type of designation. So Prosecco isn't going to age as long in the lees. You're not going to have as much of that kind of yeasty flavor and the toastiness. It's going to be much more clean, crisp. There's going to be some fruits, maybe some tropical fruits, some citrus. It has some floral notes, and that's really common with the Glera grape. So it tends to be, because of that more fruity flavor, that crispness, that's why Prosecco is actually the ideal sparkling wine if you're going to be making mimosas. By the way, 2-to-1 ratio. 2 parts Prosecco, 1 part orange juice when you're making that. But it's going to help amplify the citrus notes in the orange juice, and that's what makes it such a great drink to have with breakfast. It's also good before dinner. You can have it with dinner, but understand that Prosecco isn't as rich and as full. It's a lot lighter bodied, so maybe not as good with a robust dinner, but generally good with vegetarian dishes, seafoods, charcuterie is going to be pretty good with some of those cured meats. Now, when you're selecting a Prosecco, you want to look for one that has a label on it that says DOC. This one happens to be right here, blue label, DOC. Some of them are going to say DOCG. Either one, those signify a certain level of quality standards required for that area. If you ever see a Prosecco that doesn't say made in Italy on it, doesn't have the DOC, I'd pass on, move on to another one that has that designation. And if you want more details on those designations, I put a link below to my video on Valpolicella, the Corvina grape, where I talk about those designations in greater detail. But that's the main thing you need to know. Make sure it's from Italy. and make sure that it has the DOC or DOCG designation. You are most likely going to find it in the Brut style, which is the driest style. Sometimes you can find it in extra dry or dry, but just remember, again, I talked about this in a previous video as well, Brut is actually the driest. So extra dry and dry are sweeter than Brut. I explained that in the Champagne video. I'll link that one below as well. But Brut is going to be the dry one if you don't like it too sweet. If you like it a little sweet, go for extra dry or dry. Let's find out what this one tastes like. Today's wine is the Massotina. I don't know if that's how you say it. Massotina. We'll go with that. Massotino. This is their Prosecco, the DOC. This is a non-vintage. This is 11% alcohol. It cost me $12.99. So again, great value with Prosecco. And good marketing on their part. They put one of these little tabs on the neck of this one. So Decanter gave this particular bottle 96 points back in 2017. So even though that was 5 years ago, they're still bragging about it. Because it's non-vintage, there's a good chance it really hasn't changed that much in style, quality, etc. since then. But you never know. They do vary from vintage to vintage. Now, I'm opening this bottle. Just a quick refresher, I went into great detail about this in the video on Cava. I'll link that one below as well. I'm referencing a lot of old videos today. So we're twisting the bottle from the bottom, leaving the cage on the cork. It's coming out ever so slowly. We're going to tilt it down, and we got a nice little pop. Now, I'm drinking out of a white wine glass today. It's going to make it a little bit easier to smell it, see it, display it, but that's beautiful. I recommend a flute. It is going to help those bubbles stay around a little bit longer. But so far, you know, this is really apparent now how different this is from Champagne. Champagne, you usually have this nice long string of bubbles. These are just kind of coming from everywhere. They're really, really tiny and fine. And I can see why this is going to, you know, kind of dissipate fairly quickly. The color on this is really nice. It's fairly pale, but I'm going to go... yeah, I'm going to call it kind of a pale lemon, but it's really pretty. It's actually got a pretty nice nose. There's some sweetness in the nose. Not necessarily it's going to taste sweet, but there's some sweetness like the honeysuckle flower kind of does. A little pear and green apple, maybe some lime and lemon coming through. Maybe a hint of lemon as well. Not lemon. I already said lemon. Melon. All right. Here we go. Let's taste it. That's really nice. Again, I noticed this on the smell and I'm getting it with the taste. This does taste a little sweeter than I think it actually is. I'm going to call this off dry. It is crisp. It's refreshing. But some of the flavors of the fruit, and I can tell it is the fruit itself that is making it sweet, not too much residual sugar or something else that affected it. Really nice acidity. I got some nice juiciness coming from it. It's crisp. I'll go medium high on the acidity. Obviously there's no tannins in this. It's a white wine. The alcohol at 11%, that's fairly low for most wines these days. But with a white wine, it's not unusual to find one at 11. I'll call this medium low on the alcohol. I'm not really getting anything on my throat. It's lovely, well integrated with everything. And it is fairly light bodied. There is some creaminess associated with the bubbles that give it this feeling of maybe having a little bit more body than it does, like feeling like there's more of a mouthful than there really is because it just that effervescence in your mouth. But it is a lighter bodied wine. So I'm going to call this kind of medium low on the body as well. And it has a pretty good finish. Like I'm still getting a little bit of taste of it here. And just that nice warmth that you feel in your tummy when you've just had some sparkling wine. I love it. This is, you know, at $12.99, I'm going to put this right up there with some of my favorite Cavas that are in that same price range. This is really good. I personally wouldn't ruin this with orange juice. Maybe we could find, actually I know you can find cheaper Proseccos than this. You can also find more expensive ones. Those ones with the DOC designation might run you $20, $30, maybe even $40 for some really good ones. But this is a good value. As far as the flavors go, Again, I am getting that honeysuckle. Everything I smelled was really there. I'd say the pear is probably the most prominent. There is a little, I'd say more yellow apple than green apple. It's not quite that tart Granny Smith, more of a nice yellow apple. And yeah, some melon in there too. And I'm gonna give it one more taste here because it's just enjoyable. I'm not gonna say I can taste anything floral, but I don't know, maybe it's like a vanilla, or there's just kind of this creaminess that's, I can't quite put my finger on, but it's really delightful. There's something interesting going on here. That's a solid wine. Pretty good balance, not a lot of intensity, not a lot of complexity, but it's just doing its job really well. And again, for $13, this is a good value. I like this quite a bit. I would have this again, and I'd recommend having something like this on hand. I'll go into that in a little bit in the tip of the week. Overall, I would give this, we'll call this 6 points. Again, it's balanced. Length of the finish is pretty good. The intensity and complexity are fine. They're average, but there's nothing exceptional about either one of those. So we'll call it 6 points. Again, I do think this would go well with a variety of foods. It's great to sit by itself. This is an ideal breakfast champagne if you're having that. Good kind of brunch champagne. It's a good one to have before dinner. Again, something with some cured meats. If you're just having a little charcuterie, it'd be great after dinner. This is a pretty versatile wine that I'd have just about any time. If you're gonna have it with food, again, with shellfish, that acidity and that creaminess that I detected from it, I think would work well with some spicy foods. I do think sparkling wine in general goes well with spicy foods, so that could be another pairing to try with this one as well. In our last episode on port, I talked about why port can be an amazing gift idea, but it can be an expensive one. So let's talk about Prosecco here as a gift, because this is one of the least expensive wine gifts you can give someone, but it still has this celebratory feel to it. So for whatever reason, you're going to someone's house, you're giving them a quick birthday gift, you're dropping something off on the boss's desk for whatever reason, Prosecco is a really good go-to. And there's a couple reasons why. Number one, I think too often we tend to gravitate towards giving someone a bottle of Cabernet. And I know my wife, for example, really doesn't drink red wine all that much anymore, and unfortunately still gets gifted red wine. But Prosecco is a great gift for just about anybody, because even if you like red wine or you don't like red wine, a lot of people are still going to be okay with Prosecco. If they're not, you mix it in the morning with your orange juice for a mimosa, and it makes it a lot different in its profile. It's a great, inexpensive gift to give for just about any reason. I'd recommend having 1 or 2 bottles on hand at all times. That way, if you are in a pinch and need to run and have a gift with you, you've got a bottle of Prosecco. Or if you've got people coming over and you just need something quick for entertaining, something to have before dinner, it's a great choice for that as well. Thank you for watching Wine This Week. I hope you enjoyed this. Join me next time as we move on to Riesling. Until then, keep trying new wines, and as always, cheers.